20, almost 25 years. And I've never seen, the amount of change. I went through the change from phone to online for technology. I went from, fat client server to web-based apps, went through the mobile revolution, and suffice to say, nothing has come close to the amount of change that we're seeing in the world of AI. With that comes a great number of challenges, but also a great number of opportunities. And so we're excited to share some of the findings that we've had just in meeting with prospects and clients over the past year. It's been really interesting. All right, Dean, you want to go ahead and share the deck?
I sure can. I was actually going to have you drive since you've got all the monitors. Are you able to do that? Do you have it up?
Oh yeah, yeah, I can do that. Okay, everybody able to see AI automation, the rise of the orchestrator?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm Jeremy Antonik. I'm the founder and CEO of Scalafai. I started as a project manager in market research back in 2003 at a little startup that was called eRewards at the time, that grew to become Research Now, and then left before it became Dynata. Was with Focus Vision, did a bunch of work on the Decipher platform, had a great opportunity to help build the rep data team and acquire Research Defender. So it's just been an amazing run in market research. But frankly, what I'm most excited about are the opportunities that AI is giving us to help streamline the research operations and get us more focused on the client deliverables. And we'll talk more about that. Dean, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. See, again, I see a lot of familiar faces on this call. I'm connected with a lot of you folks. So many of you will know that it's dang near close to 30 years in the market research industry for me. Um, I've been client side, I've been big agency like GFK and Millward Brown. I've been small agency like Vox Pop Me and Ingwo and Discuss.io and MDRG out of New Orleans. A lot of my career has been focused on cutting edge methodologies, and I've kind of immersed myself into what AI is able to bring to the table over the past, I want to say, 2 years. So certainly when I was running my own shop, Demand Insights, for a while, I was heavily experimenting with AI, specifically qualitative applications of AI within surveys, and was bringing that to bear. So I'm excited to be a part of the Scalafai team as a senior advisor. Jeremy has a slightly different background than I do. I'm more full service. So together, hopefully we complement each other. With that, you can move on. Great. So, if I were to ask everyone today what the three biggest issues facing our industry was, I'm sure I'd get all kinds of answers, right? But if we were strictly going to set this up Family Feud style and have the top, 6 or 7 answers on the board, these would probably be the top three. Managing projects and the workflow really hasn't changed. Like I remember what I was doing when I was in my 20s, and it's almost exactly the same as what I was doing in my 30s and what I was doing, running studies for Vox Pop Me in my 40s. We're using Word docs and Excel files that are stored on shared drives. The communications are all over the place. The communications are on email, uh, likely with clients, and then we've got our backdoor communication channels with Teams or Slack, and there's multiple people touching each of these projects at every step of the way, and people stepping in and people stepping out when folks have the audacity to call out sick. So the bottom line is we're just all spending too much time And some estimate this to be 70 to 80% of our time on manual and repetitive tasks. So that's the first issue. The second issue is all these um, fragmented tools. And, there's some certain graphics out there that show you the market research landscape. Info Tools has a graphic that you've probably seen on LinkedIn that it has all these icons that maps the market research landscape. And Insights platform has one that's kind of more AI focused. But, from again, Microsoft Office products, like I mentioned before, Word and Excel, and communications, Slack and Teams. But there's, your survey platforms. There's your Qualtrics, Confirmits, and Deciphers of the world. Maybe you've got a tool for sampling, something else that's helping you manage quotas. Certainly, there's data tab software like SPSS and Sawtooth. And then just even on the presentation side, you've got PowerPoint, you've got Google Slides, and maybe even you're using something else like a displayer. And the problem is that none of them are really talking with each other, and that absolutely makes no sense. And so to get data from one, stage gate to the next often requires you to export it, take it offline, and so now, everything is in these offline documents, and that's not really how we want them to be. And the third one, I'm not going to spend time on it because I'm sure everyone has heard about all the problems the industry has with data quality. But the fraudsters are just getting better. And then, we as market researchers get better at detecting the fraudsters, and then the fraudsters get better again. Don't tell my mom, but it sounds like back when I was in my 20s and I had a radar detector, and then the police got, better tools, and then my radar detectors had better technology than they did, and it was a back and forth. And so if we lay on now what, AI could potentially do to solve some of these issues, we see that, go ahead and click, Jeremy. There we go. We've got opportunities to have AI powered solutions help us wade through the manual stuff in a much more efficient way. What if we had an automated tool that would keep everything moving and use computing power instead of human power where it makes sense? And ideally, it would have all the features and tools we need to run a project in one spot. Like, wouldn't that be ideal? No moving data on or off the highway, just kind of one seamless flow. And of course, the AI could be a champ at helping identify fraudsters. Bad data doesn't announce itself. It's certainly getting better at hiding what it's doing, but it would analyze respondents before they join the survey, while they're going through the survey, making sure they're not the world's fastest typer at 800 words a minute, and they'd analyze respondents after the survey, even looking at the entire data set for things like survey level speeding, AI generated text detection, and consistency pattern checks. Well, so with all this talk about AI, and given all the discussions I've had, I've probably talked to, since I've joined Scalafai as a senior advisor, I've probably spoken with 40 research agencies and brand teams. And Jeremy was having these discussions months and months before I joined the team. And, we hear basically four key things from people why they haven't gotten started, or why they haven't fully implemented things, or their starts, they've started, but it's, slowed down, or they've stopped it. Um, you know, Even if we accept the value that AI can bring to the table, for a lot of research companies, it's just, one, there's just not a lot of time, so people are overloaded. When I talk to market researchers, they all tell me, well, hey, I've got a day job, right? It's about writing questionnaires, dealing with clients, reviewing tabs, delivering insights, and creating a PowerPoint presentation. And so, I don't have hours in a day to listen to product demos. Um, Uncertainty, there's still, when you talk to folks, this kind of mysterious cloud that's hanging over AI. People maybe don't know what it can do. Certainly there's a bunch of unknowns. What happens if I implement one thing and it messes up something else? There's a fine line between R&D exploration and production reality. Teams that take risks with fragile tools and live client work can create new sets of risks rather than solving the problems they're meant to solve. And so, three, do teams feel unsupported? Maybe management isn't sure of who's going to take the lead, and so it never really happens. This has happened in my last two job stops personally. Or frankly, just the tools aren't adequate. We all know that Qualtrics decipher and confirm it. If we just look at survey software tools, they're all over 20 years old, and yet they're currently trying to bolt on AI solutions. And frankly, the amount of tech debt that they have is impossible to ignore. Those original solutions weren't built for today's demands, and there are plenty of tools that are similar to that. In fact, I had to look at Sawtooth because it is basically the oldest looking piece of software that I've ever seen, and it's still in use. It was introduced in 1983, and it's 43 years old. Next slide, Jeremy.
Okay, so what's changed? It's to say that it's been an interesting past 12 months. Like I said, has been the understatement of the century. Frankly, when I started having these discussions about 12 months ago, the tone was completely different. Just getting people to talk about AI. A lot of times it came down to, hey, we've got a person dabbling, or we would just hear, frankly, a lot of reasons to not move forward. Our client said we can't use it. There's concerns about the technology, and to be completely fair, a lot of those were very valid concerns, right? It's a new technology. The technology's changed dramatically in the last 12 months. So part of this, why is now different. It's frankly, part of it is just the capabilities. There are things that, I did last night using AI technology that was only a pipe dream 12 months ago. The rate at which the AI can help you complete tasks and get projects done, whether it's market research or in other business operations, it's just incredible. Um, and there seems to be a real shift. 12 months ago, it was, hey, we should be dabbling, but maybe it's not really a priority. Now, what we hear, Dean and I hear consistently multiple times a week is this is a priority. We are actively evaluating tools. We know we need to change. It's no longer just, hey, we want to be more productive or we want to be more efficient. There was a sense that it's almost more about survival. It's not a, hey, do we want to do this or do we not? It's if you want to be relevant 3 to 5 years from now, you have to change. Otherwise, you will simply not be able to keep up in terms of speed and cost and the better, faster, cheaper challenge that that we've all experienced over the last couple of decades. Things are going to change, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay. So, when I look at the technology, I mentioned the technology has changed. Roughly 12 months ago, as we are all kind of exploring with generative AI, and a lot of us are using Chat GPT, or I'm a big Claude fan myself, but I can go in and ask it to summarize documents or write things for me, and that's very helpful from a task perspective. And then the models evolved a little bit where you get a little bit more. I can maybe load a data file in and start having it do some analysis. I think a big part of what's driving, some of the change and sort of unlocking some new opportunities for us is this concept of agentic workflows. If you've been following AI for, the last couple of years, it used to be called robotic process automation, RPA. And it's ironic. All of this incredible technology comes back to business process management, old school, lean Six Sigma, big business process management, where you have step one and step two. And if something happens, then you go to step three. If not, you go to step 2B. So that those fundamental principles are the exact same. The difference is instead of having a human involved in every single step, it could be the system going in and looking at decisions or pulling in data or analyzing data, et cetera. And that has just opened up a whole new world where AI is kind of moving from this, hey, I can help you with a little task, to I can actually be part of your day-to-day operational workflow and free up some of those mundane tasks that your team are currently doing. Ultimately, what I call is a third class of labor. A decade or almost two ago, market research went from onshore, and then there's been a tremendous amount of time, money, and effort put in moving some of the big operations offshore. And let's be honest, to very mixed results. In every company I've been with, I had to have part of my operations plan be, will the client allow us to use offshore labor or not? And we had plenty of times where the client would say, "Hey, if you're doing work with this particular country, the answer is no. We will not work with you." And so we found some other solutions, to that, using Eastern Europe, for example, instead of India. What I'm seeing now is we can get a better outcome, a more consistent outcome by using what I call the digital labor, and that's specifically the AI agents to do things like some of the initial data analysis and take a look at the information and and draft content, and do things like some of the basic survey programming that we're talking about. Um, so and at the end of the day, it's a change where you have the work will look very different than it did a couple years ago. In my experience, it still comes out to net growth. I think about, when I started as a project manager at this e-rewards company, a sample company, and in 2003, it literally took us 4 to 5 people to set up a sample job. Right? We had the salesperson, we had the project manager, we had a person that would go to the old Oracle database to write a query to pull the sample. We had a person that would go to the website and set up like what we'll call the landing page, and then a person that would actually go and kind of process the bulk email operations. By the time I left, in 2017, we had that down to one person, where one person could go in, check feasibility, set up the pricing, drop in their survey link, set up their quotas, hit a button, and they're off to the races. At the end of the day, we still had net growth, but there definitely was a lot of change, and there was definitely some job displacement that was included in that. Okay. Dean, you want to walk us through some of the traps of partial automation?
Yeah, sure. We have spoken to these companies and they're giving it a shot, right? There's different ways that they think that they're getting more efficient. There's Copilot that's out there. A lot of companies are trying to leverage APIs so that certain systems will talk with other systems. Um, we were talking about all the technology, disparate technology tools and whatnot. So let's get this tool talking with this tool so that there's no manual handoff. A bit of AI here, automated transcription, of the open ends here. So like the companies are pecking away at it. There's really like only one conversation I remember having since late November where Jeremy, you and I both said, "Wow, like you must be in the top 5% of automation." And the person we were talking to about their company was really proud of the work that they've done because they had it they had it together. The workflow was pretty seamless. They had cobbled it together, and they were getting a lot more done than when they had started. Now, we're going to be talking about this. They had set aside a dedicated AI team, so a lot of it comes down to the resources that you can put towards dipping your toe in here and really giving it a go. Now, the problem though with just partial automation, and certainly you have to start somewhere, is that each one of these kind of risk points, I call them, these handoff points between design, collect, process, analyze, deliver. We've got all these stage gates for a market research project. Every time you take the data offline, there's risk. There's risk that um, you know the human is going to make a mistake. There's risk, frankly, at the very bottom here. Once a team exits the automation freeway, it's really hard to get back on track again, right? So our folks taking the data offline, doing something with it with AI or Copilot, and then, have that discipline to upload the data back into another process that can kind of zip it along and so on and so forth. So, these are all risks, but certainly ones that a lot of companies have decided that's worth the risk in order to automate some pieces of the process. Now, that being said, the reason we've got analyze and deliver here in Brown is that the back end of the workflow tends to be the area where people are kind of struggling the most, or they deem those stages to have the most wasted time between trying to pour over data tabs and manual creation of slides in PowerPoint that take days and days and days. Virtually every research team we talk to is still pulling together the final PowerPoint presentation a day before the readout and the VPs, making changes and whatnot. So there's certainly opportunities at the back end to help research companies with that. Next slide, Jeremy.
Dean, we're at 11:30, so I think
We
I'm
gotta
going.
go. Yeah,
I
we
think
gotta.
I'm gonna kind of skip us forward here a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah. All right. So one of the reasons why you should be looking at a native research platform versus just your regular chat GPTs and Claudes is that the platform can be trained to be an expert in market research. And so, this is incredibly important. We just have, some sample numbers of articles and guidelines here that each of the sets of agents that we have been trained on. And so, when the AI goes to write a survey, they're not asking, "Hey, are you the CEO of a Fortune 100 company?" Yes, no. Or, how do you rate our company's quality and value? A double barrel question. So, it's important that you're working with a platform that is trained in market research because we all have lived it. There's so much nuance in what we do. Go ahead, Jeremy. So, the ideal scenario really is this end-to-end workflow. Jeremy, one more to 12. Oh, sorry, you're there. We've got this end-to-end workflow where, you can jump in and out of the highway. So you can start at the very beginning with an idea for a study or a client brief, and have the AI, understand the research objectives, understand how long you want the survey or how many questions you want the survey to ask or what areas you want to dig into most, and go ahead and write a draft survey for you. Other companies we talk to, they'll take that on. Um, and go back and forth with the client and have a finished Word document that we can upload into the platform, and they just start there. They upload the document into the platform. It can be extremely quick, and then leverage APIs to manage the field work because, and then the quotas as well. In the survey we know what the quotas are, so there's no messing around with that. Have APIs out to the biggest panels. We're doing the data quality on the fly, as I mentioned before, during, and after the survey process. And then once the completes are in, the data quality is high. Then you go straight into analysis. Tables, full tables for an entire study can take mere minutes to produce with weighting, significance testing. And then once you've got the tables, then you roll right into the deliverables. And those are typically your PowerPoint outputs, Word documents, and even infographics.
Okay, so we're not going to spend too much time going through this full thing, but I mentioned the concept of, agentic AI. One of the questions that we got was basically how do you know it's accurate? That question came specifically within the context of analysis. And one of the things that I've seen and experienced directly, it basically comes back to old school division of labor, right? If I take a very large task, such as I need you to go do some analysis, and I throw the data set at it, that is a very, very large multi-stage task with a bunch of complexity, a bunch of detail, a bunch of nuances that, when you throw something that big at an AI model, it may or may not, meet your expectations. And so really what we've done is we've gone through and said, okay, what are almost the sub steps that are required, right? And in some cases, you'll see there's QA steps. In an agentic world, one of the nice things you can do is set up these agents in what they call an adversarial network. So, take something like, survey programming, right? Once somebody's survey programmed, then they go through and there's somebody that needs to QA that, right? If you take the QA and you give it the perspective, hey, assume it's wrong until you prove that it's right, and we don't have to worry about the dynamics of interpersonal relationships, and just let the computers decide. Especially with survey programming, in a lot of cases, it's a very binary. It's programmed correctly or it's programmed incorrectly, right? So, something like that is a great use of agents. Or on the analysis side, having an agent that can go through and do the analysis, that can look at the findings and often prioritize those findings, right? When I look at a large tabulation and I look at significance testing, there's things that are statistically significant all over the place. But some of those may not be the key insights that are the highest priority to share with the stakeholders, right? So there's a real opportunity to go through and say, hey, what is the task at hand? Whether that's analyzing the data or designing the presentation based upon the different types of research that you're doing, different research objectives, creating that, or even creating, visuals. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Yeah. In this one, this is probably one of the most significant, but one of those things that you're probably not going to talk too much about. When you hear us refer to an AI native platform and it's built with AI from the ground up, well, what does that mean, really? Um, a big part of that means, well, you have to start with a modern tech stack. You can't take a platform that was built 20 years ago and then start lobbing AI into it. Because some of the AI features, they are very substantial, like having this AI write the survey, having the platform go through and analyze a Word document, and the many, many different ways people write their survey programming instructions, and having the AI go through and parse that out correctly. So, very, very significant features. but some of them are much smaller, right? Of having the system being able to detect bias and ensure readability, looking at LOI, looking at fraud signals, looking at quota. So some very, very small tactical things. Even something like, when we create a tabulation now, it's a process that in previous companies, usually that I would call that data processing, right? We're going to pull the data file, we're going to clean it. And usually cleaning meant let's pull it into Excel and sort and filter. And eventually you get a clean data file. You send it off to your data processor, maybe an outsourced shop, spend maybe $1,000 or $2,000, wait 24 to 48 hours, and eventually you get your tabs back with your banners. That particular task now can be done in maybe 5 minutes max. And part of that are there some very tactical uses of AI, such as a lot of times we want your demographics in the banner, right, of your tabs. Well, the platform and AI is very, very good at what they call classification, right? So it can go through and say, hey, out of your 70, 100, 200 plus variables and questions, which of these are actually demographic questions? And let's identify those and give you one button to just drop those into the tabulation, right? So, when we say AI and AI native, yes, that does mean some very, very large features, but it also means some very small tactical things that just makes the platform easier to use. And that's a really big deal because years ago, I went through a big change in the research nowadays where we went from confirm it to decipher. And to be honest, that was brutally painful. It was a very large effort, and we got through it. But it was hard because the team had been using Confirm It for years. They knew exactly where to click. They knew exactly where, what to do in different situations, and then they had to relearn a lot of that. So anything we can do to kind of reduce the magnitude of that change management and make it easier for the teams. And part of that are these little tactical uses of AI to make things easier will really lessen the challenge that comes with change management.
So, obviously, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but you can see, when we're talking about the different, stage gates of a research project, how the upfront ones now have we've taken days and days of work and we've reduced it to minutes and hours. And then on the back end, with regards to the tabs and the reporting and the PowerPoints and infographics, we've reduced that now to also minutes and hours. And so, frankly, the biggest chunk of time you're going to spend on a research project is the infield portion. And given the quality checks, the 46 quality checks that we have, best in the industry, you're able to feel confident when you hit that quota target, n equals 1,000, that you've got 1,000 great completes, and that just kind of processes the data from there. Next slide. Some of the outputs that we've got are, incredible. We're going to have probably two layers of outputs. Currently have our standard presentation outputs, which, are classic graphs and an AI generated kind of header at the top, and maybe some demo breakouts along the side, to probably within a week, week and a half, having advanced presentation outputs with, really, built with storytelling in mind, visual graphics, really, really professional looking outputs. And speaking of professional outputs, one of the things that has caught the attention of a lot of the agencies and brand teams that we've been talking to have been the infographics. So, these infographics with literally a two-sentence prompt, like you do not have to be a prompt engineer to create these at all. And the AI will simply go through and take maybe the top four findings or the top five findings and instantly bring it to life. These infographics are being produced in under a minute.
Okay, one of the things we would be remiss to talk about, and when I start every demo, frankly, before I even show a single feature within the application, and Dean probably chuckles at this point, I say, hey, before we even get into the functionality, let's talk about data security. Let's talk about privacy. Because, I think we've all seen in the last year that, we've always said data is important, right? We've talked about big data for years, but now that data is critical rocket fuel for, your AI, both current and how it's trained and how it could be, used in the future. And so one of the things, I told the engineers before we started building our platform, I said, guys, we are going for SOC 2 compliance. We are going to get audited by third party, vendors. We're going to use software platforms to help support that process. So plan accordingly. And we did, and we achieved that SOC 2 compliance last year. We put the servers on AWS, production grade, infrastructure with, penetration testing and, all those critical things that you need to ensure, confidentiality and availability and processing integrity. And then one of the big questions is training, right? It's like, okay, well, what are you doing with that data? From our perspective, our position on that is we take the data that is being captured about your surveys and your survey responses, and we use that to provide you with the service, and that is it, right? We do not, under any way, shape, or form, take your data, use it to train our models, and then provide that service to some other client, right? That's a big no-no. And so those are definitely some questions as you're looking at different options. Make sure you ask about the data and where is it being secured and do they have certification and point blank, are they training with it or not? Okay. So at the end of the day, it comes back to the challenge that most of us have experienced for decades. The better, faster, cheaper. Um, but we're at the point where it's like we are making significant, inroads in that. So, better something like survey programming, a very tactical type of thing. Instead of that taking 2 to 3 days and having, have it have senior survey programmers, that can be done in like often like 15 to 20 minutes. Yeah, so tremendous, opportunities and speed, the platform looking at survey design, for example, and helping you grade. And because when I think about data quality, I've seen plenty of times where survey design is part of the problem, right? So how can we make that better? How can we get that done faster? And then cheaper, something like survey programming. I'm previous companies, I would easily spend 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 to program 15, 20, 25 minute plus survey. Now that's done with maybe a couple $100, because the AI is going through and chugging through all of that content and then programming it, automatically. So there are things that we will be able to do that are just simply unheard of in terms of, quality, in terms of speed, and in terms of price.
So for the individual researcher, quantitative researcher, they're going to be moving from executor to orchestrator. And, um, we talked about, how, yesterday's researcher used to have to know how to play every instrument. But frankly, today and into the future, the researcher is going to be conducting the symphony. They're going to be defining the brief, leading the charge, setting the tempo, and intervening, frankly, when only when human judgment is needed. So, we talk about humans in the loop. We talk about humans in the lead. So there's a lot of discussion now about humans in the lead. So considering AI can kind of build things on its own, we'll quickly move from humans kind of orchestrating everything to really the best and the brightest being the leaders and setting the the direction for the company, and kind of AI just kind of picking up everything from there and making sure that it gets taken care of. And frankly, research agencies are going to change dramatically within the next 2 years. Your research agencies are no longer getting paid for their ability to organize a project or knock out tasks. So, your value is going to be based in the knowledge of your client's industry and your client's company, and the ability to activate insights. Um, Real quickly, what does the future hold? Well, we're calling this clairvoyant market insight. Is there something called, perfect insight? If I combine my quantitative research, my qualitative research, social listening, first and third party data, all into kind of one predictive engine that my senior executives can simply ask questions of. Um, and so, if you had perfect insight, would you use it? Of course, the answer is yes. If there's any Star Trek fans out there, at one time they had the replicator. You could ask for anything on the ship, food, machinery, and the replicator would automatically create it. And I see executives speaking to the system and it's spitting out answers in plans just like that. And then last slide, what does it mean for market research leaders? Well, we've been talking about this, and I've mentioned a couple of times, you need to start now. Don't wait. You're going to get passed by. Pick a process, pick a problem area along your workflow, and try to get that automated. Two, think end to end. Obviously, we've got our version of an end-to-end solution. Other companies do as well. Invest in your people, especially your younger folks. I know that there's somebody on here that is trying to work with younger researchers and give them hope for what their role is going to be in the market research landscape if some of these more mundane and repetitive tasks are taken off their table. Well, researchers are going to be or need to be more commercially minded. It's kind of captured here in number five. If you listen to Oksana Sobel at Clorox, her team is all commercially focused now. It's what new ideas, money making ideas do you bring to the table? And what questions do you need answered as far as your go-to-market questions? So research is basically um, driving growth throughout the corporation. That's their sole focus. And then lastly, flex your team. So, research teams I know are being more fluid. Certainly on the client side, you can shift bodies towards projects that have more impact from a revenue perspective. But, one day when I was running at Hyundai, Insights at Hyundai, I could envision having a couple of market researchers in my product development team. And they're there. They're part of every discussion that the product development guys have. I could see a researcher getting put in my innovation team. I can see three researchers getting put in my marketing team, and they're there. Two researchers put in my sales department. One researcher put in my development department. And so the entire research team now, instead of being a standalone, centralized organization, is frankly matrix throughout the entire organization. You've got the voice of the customer representatives sitting in every single meeting, day in, day out, making decisions alongside your folks in the other departments. And with that, we are a little over. If you guys are able to stay on and hang on just a little bit longer, we've got a couple of questions. Some folks had sent us questions ahead of time, and there might be some questions in the chat right now.
Okay, so we've got a question of how do you train the models? So a lot of that is going to come back to the data availability, pulling information, frankly, prioritizing, right? Having the model instead of being a jack of all trades that can answer any question about any topic, to say, hey, we're going to kind of feed it this information specifically to market research, and so that it knows, and when it gets that input, it can look at the logic and then apply the market research principles, whether those principles be just in general or there's an opportunity to even insert some of those rules and guidelines like a brand perception study. Like say, hey, here's generally how the industry might do brand perception, but here's how we at our organization, like to do. So there's sort of, kind of the general training, and then there's some hyper tuning that you can do specific to your organization. We did get one question submitted at point of registration about synthetic data. We haven't talked a lot about that on this particular call. That's a subject on its own. My personal opinion, just very very quickly, is that is there a role for that? Absolutely. There are use cases where if you need a quick sanity check, that you can go out and do that. There are some use cases where you could potentially augment sample, almost sort of like like a weighting type of scenario where you're maybe filling out quotas. Is that going to replace surveying and and doing qual work with real people? Absolutely not. And that's a whole discussion in its own, so I'll leave that one there. Okay. Any other questions?
I don't see any, Jeremy. I think we can probably wrap it up. A lot of people had to jump off, so
Yep. Yep. Okay, guys. Well, thank you very much. We hopefully hope this has been very helpful for you. And if you would like to chat about AI and market research, we'd love to speak with you.
yep. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye, guys.